In 2026, there's only one way to compete for a World Championship invite in the Pokémon Trading Card Game. You gotta play Standard. A standard Pokémon deck consists of 60 cards from the most recent Pokémon TCG expansions and includes no more than 4 of a card with the same name, except Basic Energy. Standard rotates the oldest few sets out every year and keeps the game fresh by introducing new cards with the game's expansions. Standard formats are the lifeblood of many trading card games. A company prints new cards, players have to buy them in order to build decks, and in a couple of years, sometimes months, those decks are irrelevant and you need to buy new cards in order to keep up with the game's evolving competitive scene. Since Pokémon organized play resumed after the COVID-19 pandemic in 2022, Standard has been the only supported game mode for players working towards a World Championship invitation. But that wasn't always the case. Before COVID-19, there were League Challenges, League Cups, and Regional Championships held in expanded format, a game mode that includes all sets from 2011's Black and White through the most recent expansion. The last regional championship before COVID was actually an expanded regional, and I had a front row seat to the event as I finished in the top 8 with my Snorlax VMAX deck. So what happened to expanded format? Why did the Pokémon Company International quietly kill off expanded during the COVID-19 pandemic? And what does the future hold for this forgotten format? In this video, I'll be diving into some expanded lore while offering up my opinion as to why expanded has been neglected over the last few years. Then I'll give some thoughts on the future of this once beloved Pokemon TCG format. But before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to my channel sponsor, Full Grip Games. Full Grip Games is a local game store in Akron, Ohio that has been supporting the content I create on Tricky Gym since 2018. Many of my best friends, including my wife Natalie, work here and do their best to serve the Pokemon trading card game community with awesome events and a great selection of cards, which you can find at fullgripgames.com. To ring in the new year, Full Grip is offering 15% off everything from now until January 12th. That's sealed product, singles, accessories, and more, all 15% off between now and January 12th at fullgripgames.com. And of course, if you've got some extra cards you'd like to turn into cash or store credit, Full Grip is always buying online at fullgripgames.com. Thank you so much for supporting the content I create on Tricky Gym by shopping at Full Grip Games. At the onset of the 2014-2015 World Championship season, the Pokémon Company introduced expanded format as an additional way to play the Pokémon trading card game. Unlike Standard, this format didn't rotate and included every expansion from 2011's Black and White through the most recent set. That season, the Pokémon Company actually forced you to play Expanded at every regional championship. Day 1, the event would take place using Standard format, and then if you qualified for Day 2, you had to play Expanded format. That means that players could play entirely different decks for the first and second day of competition if they wanted to. Now in this debut season, Standard and Expanded formats weren't that different. Standard featured cards from 2012's Boundaries Crossed onwards, while Expanded added in the extra 7 sets between Boundaries Crossed and Black and White. When I won the St. Louis Regional Championship in 2015, I played this Standard legal Landorus EX Crobat deck. And when I qualified for Day 2, I still played Landorus EX with Crobat. I just got to add in some level balls from Next Destinies, which made the deck more consistent. The funniest thing about the Phase 1, Phase 2, Standard and Expanded split is when a regional didn't have enough players for Day 2 Swiss rounds. When that was the case, they made players play Standard for Swiss, then switched their decks to Expanded to play out Top 8 cut. Switching decks mid-tournament was kind of insane, but thankfully, these dual format regionals only lasted a year. Then Pokemon started hosting expanded regional championships in addition to standard events. Although expanded regional attendance was usually a bit lower than standard, the events were popular, and many players, such as myself, looked forward to them as a nice mix-up from standard. Since expanded was a less explored format with a larger card pool, it really rewarded deck brewing and testing. Archetypes and lists weren't nearly as hammered out as today's standard decks, and having a solid grasp of the card pool was advantageous. There was so little information on top expanded decks that it was almost impossible to copy a list you found online and succeed. That's really refreshing when compared to standard, a format where you can probably guess 55 or more of your opponent's cards just by seeing their starter. In just a couple of years, Expanded had become this vast, largely unexplored, and exciting Pokemon TCG frontier. Secret decks were getting brewed up by testing groups all the time. Many of my most memorable Pokemon experiences are from testing for Expanded events. And then, in the spring of 2020, Pokemon organized play was suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. All organized play was canceled, and events wouldn't return until the spring of 2022. And when they did, Expanded format was not included in the lineup. And that's the way it's been ever since. Regional championships are all standard now, and tournament organizers don't have an option to run League Cups and League Challenges using the Expanded format. Expanded has been completely removed from the competitive Pokemon TCG circuit, and no reason was ever given. Not only is Expanded no longer playable in tournaments, the format is also no longer playable online. Before the pandemic, the Pokemon Trading Card Game Online was the official online client of the Pokemon Trading Card Game. The application was a quirky and humble one whose roots dated back to a browser game that launched in 2011. Though not perfect, the Pokemon Trading Card Game Online supported the entire expanded card pool, which allowed for players to enjoy expanded format online. On March 1st, 2023, the Pokemon Company shut down the servers for the Pokemon Trading Card Game Online in favor of their new client, the Pokemon Trading Card Game Live, which only supports cards from Sun and Moon through the most recent expansion, leaving out everything from Black and White and X and Y. This is perhaps the largest blow to expanded format, as now the format is unplayable on Pokemon's official online client. But the format isn't completely dead. In Japan, Expanded continues to have a decent following, and for the last couple of years, Japan has hosted an expanded side event at the Champions League Aichi. You can also occasionally find an expanded side event at Western Premier events, but that's about it. This once premier format that used to award championship points towards a Worlds invitation has now been relegated to side events. Pokemon continues to monitor expanded format for problematic combinations and updates the ban list when necessary, but hasn't made any indication that they plan on supporting the format any further than that. The biggest expanded news in recent years is that the Pokemon Company International hired two-time international champion and expanded guru Stefan Ivanov to write an article about the state of expanded for the front page of Pokemon.com in October of 2025. If you are interested at all in the current expanded metagame, definitely give this article a read and follow Stefan on social media. To give you the notes though, Regidrago V-Star is the new king of expanded, claiming 13 of the top 16 placements at this year's Aichi side event. From 2015 to 2020, Expanded had become a mainstay in competitive play and a popular way to enjoy the Pokemon TCG. Then from 2020 to 2025, Expanded fell off completely because it was abandoned by the Pokemon Company and didn't have a strong enough grassroots following to keep it alive. To be honest, it's very strange to see Pokemon just let go of their non-rotating secondary format, but I have some theories as to why they have done so. One of the biggest problems with the Pokemon trading card game is that most Pokemon fans don't know how to play it. Pokemon is unique amongst trading card games in that it's a hobby nearly entirely driven by collectors and only played by a supreme minority of those. I suspect that over the course of the last decade, that's been a major point of conversation amongst executives at the Pokemon Company International. How do we start to change the narrative around the Pokemon trading card game? How do we change the Pokemon TCG from a game that is perceived as a collector's only game to a game that people know and enjoy playing? Taking a look at Pokemon's decisions regarding competitive play since the pandemic, it's evident that they are trying to make the game as accessible as possible to the masses. Decks are cheaper than they've ever been, regional championships are all professionally produced, and a single narrative is weaved throughout them that leads to the World Championships in August. Pokemon has a slick new overlay for their productions that makes the TCG feel more and more like a video game and gives you all the pertinent information about a match right there on the screen. And they've increased their prize pools to be bigger than ever. Limiting competitive play to a single format makes the game easier to digest for the masses, which has been a common theme with Pokemon's decisions over the last few years, so I have to imagine that Expanded getting sidelined is part of that. Another major issue that started to become evident with Expanded format towards the end of its life was card availability. Many staple cards required for competitive decks were getting older and more difficult to find. The most notable of which were ace-spec cards, like Computer Search and Dowsing Machine, which were required for nearly all competitive decks, yet hadn't been printed in nearly a decade. In the final years of Expanded, damaged copies of Computer Search would sell at events for nearly $100, with players scrambling last minute to find them for their decks. On top of being difficult to find in the first place, many ace specs that players had were considered marked while in sleeves because they were warped or damaged. This created an issue at regional events where judges were having players replace their damaged ace specs with proxy cards, usually just a basic energy with the word Computer Search scrawled on it so that their deck wouldn't be considered marked. Despite widespread issues with card availability, the Pokémon Company International never offered up any reprint sets or promos to make their older cards more affordable or less damaged. This has always been very strange to me, especially since the Pokémon Company Japan does reprint expanded staples and distributes them as promos. This circles back to the fact that creating a deep game with multiple formats for players is not the main focus of the Pokémon Company International. The Pokémon Company International is busy trying to print enough standard product to calm down collectors from freaking out about scalpers and the prices of sealed products. After all, collectors are the people paying the bills, not the players. Consequently, you have to imagine that supporting secondary formats for competitive play is the absolute last priority for the Pokémon Company International. But even before all of the Logan Paul hype and the market spike that happened with the pandemic in 2020, the Pokémon Company International still refused to support expanded format with reprinted cards, even while they were running expanded regional championships. It would have been cool, in theory, to get a product like an expanded trainer toolkit or something that helped get more of these old cards into circulation. However, it's easy to imagine some marketing executives at the Pokémon Company International shooting that down since it wouldn't fly off the shelves. Again, this is a game supported by collectors, not players, so you'd probably have to slap some rare Charizard or something dumb on it to try and get people to buy it. I fully understand that an expanded toolkit wouldn't be worth it for the Pokémon Company to put on shelves at game stores. Not enough folks would buy it, sure. But I still don't see why the Pokémon Company International can't distribute expanded prize packs to leagues. They already do this for standard cards to make standard decks more affordable. I have to imagine it wouldn't be that difficult to support leagues with some expanded prize packs, giving a cool holo treatment to old cards and allowing players to learn more about the history of the game they love with neat reprints. And as far as no longer supporting expanded on their online client, that's just an entirely different can of worms. The Pokémon Trading Card Game Live's development began internally at the Pokémon Company International in 2018 with the release of Sun and Moon Lost Thunder. And when the game was released in 2022, the development team had only programmed cards from Lost Thunder through the most recent set. Eventually, the TCG Live team went back and coded the 9 additional Sun and Moon sets that predated Lost Thunder to complete the Sun and Moon block, but hasn't committed the resources to programming the X and Y or Black and White blocks. One of the biggest critiques about the Pokémon Trading Card Game Live from players is that it lacks the card depth and game modes of the Pokémon Trading Card Game Online. However, it doesn't really seem like the Pokémon Company International is interested in investing the resources into making more game modes playable on the Pokémon Trading Card Game Live. TCG Live is, more or less, a completely free-to-use game that teaches people how to play the Pokémon Trading Card Game. If its main function was to serve die-hard Pokémon TCG fans, then surely there would be more game modes. But if we assume that the function of the client is to help onboard new Pokémon Trading Card Game players and teach them how to play Standard, well, then we start to see why Pokémon doesn't really care about adding extra cards on Live for people to play Expanded. Sad as it is, the Pokémon Trading Card Game as a hobby isn't really about the players, it's about the collectors, and many of the decisions that get made regarding competitive play start to make more sense when you look at the hobby that way. However, I do believe that the Pokémon Company International is trying to change that narrative, and in order to change that narrative, I suspect that they are flattening competitive play to make it super easy to engage with. That might create a more shallow experience for those of us that are super invested, but the truth is, most of us will be here anyways, whether or not our favorite game modes get any additional support. The beautiful thing about a flourishing trading card game like the Pokemon TCG is that we as fans don't need any additional support from Pokemon in order to enjoy alternative formats. Grassroots events happen all the time. You just have to know where to look. Since Expanded dissolved, I've invested time and energy into growing Gym Leader Challenge, another alternative format that uses the expanded card pool. The format is now played at Gym Leader Challenge leagues all over the world, and Full Grip Games hosts huge cash tournaments for Gym Leader Challenge as well as other retro formats throughout the year, which gives our local and regional players lots of different ways to engage with the Pokémon trading card game. Full Grip is even considering hosting an expanded cash event if we can garner enough interest for it. I'll keep you updated on whether or not that becomes a reality. Anyways, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the state of expanded format and why it got the can. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this video and want to hear more in-depth commentary on the Pokémon trading card game, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and Happy New Year!